Ivan, thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear you read. When TJ and Double Negative were released together in combination, we had a discussion at the Rand Club in a sort of rather surreal atmosphere of the Rand Club downtown. And it was intriguing to see David and Ivan speak to one another, because both are possessed of such humility that they only spoke about the excellence of the other. So it was a peculiarly sort of refracted conversation in a certain way. But the idea of refraction is actually quite intriguing in relation to the text. I'll get onto that in a moment. Corinna mentioned that I should discuss something about the editing of the novel, and the few people that I've mentioned to that I've had the privilege of editing Ivan's manuscripts have quite rightly asked, is there anything to be done in them as an editor? And there is virtually nothing, to be honest, but luckily we have a sufficiently pernickety disposition that both of us can discuss the placement of a comma, because that really is all that the editing is amounted to. But what I have done in the case of both Double Negative and the forthcoming work by Ivan is try to earn my 170 Rand per 1,000 words that the publishers pay by writing him some version of a description of the text before I begin working on it, more or less to, I suppose, to demonstrate that I understand, or have some sense of what he's doing before I embark on arguing about the comma. And the description that I gave him on Double Negative really was a letter just written directly to Ivan. I'm not going to read it, but in a sense, what I endeavoured to do in that communication with Ivan was to give a sense of what I found most intriguing about the novel's three-part structure. I just want to say something about that, and I won't speak at length, as lecturers in English literature are inclined to do. But it's a fascinating text in the sense that it reflects very resonantly on the relation, firstly, of writing to the image, because it was a collaboration, and the first question I'm going to ask Ivan is about its origin and the collaboration with David Goldblatt, but a reflection on the relation between words and imagery. But it seems to me to be a remarkable study in the process of looking. And what has always intrigued me about Ivan's work, since the remarkable novel The Folly, which is a sort of neglected masterpiece of South African fiction, is his wonderful talent to make people see the world as if they're seeing it for the first time. This incredible capacity for stripping away the detritus of sound bites and noise, and to focus through very carefully selected phrases and words on a combination which is utterly enticing and makes you see the world around you, whether that world is the photography of David Goldblatt, the borders of Johannesburg, whether it's the experience of walking through the city. It makes you see those things through the eyes of a particular aesthetic, through the eyes of Ivan, and you get a remarkable sense of regeneration of the possibilities of the world. And I've always thought that his aesthetic is one of the remaining guards against despondency and cynicism in relation to living in Johannesburg, and I think one day he'll be called the Bard of Johannesburg. But the three-part structure of the novel begins with a process of the young Neville Lister learning to look through the eyes of Saul Auerbach, who's a documentary photographer, artist. And it's essentially the process of learning to see, and the possibility of noticing detail and possibility within every single circumstance or situation. So they choose from the top of Langemann-Kop, they choose a house to go down and to discover a photograph that would actually bring what is occurring in that house to life. And it's the idea that no matter where we find ourselves, if we learn appropriate ways of looking, we will be able to see the world in meaningful and deep detail. The second part of the novel is called Dead Letters, and it concerns, after a period in London, Neville Lister coming back to South Africa, having avoided national service and coming back in 1994. And it's a part of the text which looks at the process of transformation in different ways, but at the same time looks at what types of communication, through this device or trope of the dead letter, have not reached their destination, and what those incomplete journeys of meaning and communication mean. And then the third part, Neville Lister has become a photographer in a sort of nascent sense and has had a section of an exhibition dedicated to his work. And he's interviewed by Janie, a young, very modern post-apartheid interviewer. And suddenly the world has become digital and the surface of the world has become preeminent. And we see that what Neville Lister's project is the photographing of walls in Johannesburg, each with a very significant letter slot in the wall. So it's a remarkable structure which is a rumination on the process of images, writing, memory and history. And in a way it's the most profound account of South African history in the literary work that I've seen. So I'd like to begin by asking Ivan about the origins of the project with David and how those collaborations and their discussions over many years gave rise to a double work.
The project with David goes back practically about 5 or 6 years. I've done some work with David prior to that, when I was working on Portrait with Keys. I wrote a short sequence of text which were published in a catalogue called 51 Years, which was a retrospective, I think the first major retrospective of David's work at the MACBA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona. So that was our first joint work. David, of course, had a long history of working with writers. He worked famously with Gordon in the 70s on that book about mines. And he's worked with Lionel Abrams, for instance. He's always enjoyed working with writers, and he often cites writers as his major influence when he talks about his work, which is interesting in itself. What happened then is, through some rather vague process, we began to think of doing something together. We can't really pin it down to a particular discussion, but David was putting together a selection of his Johannesburg photographs, and he approached me at some point and said, look, let's finally do something together. We've been talking about this in a vague way. Do you feel like writing something? And I was at a point where I wanted to write a novel. And so I said to him, well, if you'll accept a novel, then I'll write something for you. And we leapt in, with blithe disregard for the implications for publishers and others. He gave me a set of prints to work from, which was an initial selection of the pictures he was thinking of putting into TJ, what became TJ. And I went away with those, and they sat next to my desk for a couple of years while I wrote the novel. And I looked at them, also didn't look at them, because I didn't want to be sucked directly into David's world. I finally produced the novel, took it to him. I think he was taken aback, but to his credit, he said, well, this is great, now we have a novel, we have a book of photographs, let's find a publisher. And we approached Contrasto in Italy, who had published David before, who are specialist photographic publishers. We have done some very strange publications. There's a set of 4 books, for instance, which I covered, 4 photographic books, which comes in one of those little weedy suitcases that you can take on an aeroplane. So they were just kind of bold about the whole thing, and they said, yes, we can do this, we'll just figure out how to fit them together. And that proved to be quite difficult, because to package a novel and a coffee table sized book of photographs together is actually quite hard. And the cheapest option would have been simply to shrink wrap them. And then we had a very great designer who said, let's try and work this out. And she came up with the idea of the dummy book, which has the novel concealed inside it, which I think is metaphorically perfect for the project.